Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are ya? We are in January now of 2023, so how's the new year going? Is it feeling fresh and new? Yeah, just wondering how you're doing. Today's episode, I think, is really something that I hear a lot of HSPs talk about is how do we navigate relationships, friendships when we feel misunderstood, when people are uncomfortable when we share our feelings. Jen and I talk about how do you look at relationships and assess, is this a relationship that when I share how I'm feeling, it's honored and we have the same value that means depth and intimacy. And sometimes when we share how we're feeling, that's not what the other person has in mind. And they don't really want to hear about that. And that's not the type of relationship that they want to have. And some relationships we don't do that in. And I think we often think as HSPs that to show up authentically and vulnerably means that we share all of ourselves to everyone. And Jen and I talk about how having boundaries and keeping parts of ourselves to ourselves in certain relationships is really a form of self-care and nurturing. And how do we have expectations that are realistic? How do we parse out which relationships we can bring what things to? How do we navigate when people feel annoyed by our feelings? So I think this is a really helpful episode. I do want to say that I'm share about part of an incident that happened with somebody that I know. And I don't know how to do this podcast and bring real life stories to you without it being hurtful to other people sometimes. That if this person listened to the episode, it might not feel kind to them. It is certainly not my intention ever to be unkind to anybody. And I don't know how to talk about the things that go on with me without bringing in other relationships. I do my best to protect people's privacy, to keep it anonymous. I certainly have my own blind spots and limitations. I have said this many times before, that there are certain people in my life, if you talk to them about how I show up, you would get a very different experience than how I show up here on the podcast. And that's also about, I only share certain parts of myself with certain people. So just please know that my intentions are to help you, the listener, navigate through bumps and difficulties in relationships. So what do we do when we feel like people really don't get us and don't have an appreciation or a value for all of who we are, yet there are certain parts of who we are and what we can bring to a relationship work? I don't know. I think it's a good episode. I think that's all I have to say. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen. How are you?
Hi, Patricia. How am I? I am crazy.
You have a lot going on.
Busy.
Yeah.
I have so much going on. Yeah.
You do.
Thanks for being with me through it.
You're welcome.
Yeah. It's, just after Thanksgiving, there's the holidays. I fell in love with the house and I will want to see if I can get it. And so there's all that. And then, of course, we're coming up on another holiday.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a lot.
You have a lot more moving pieces in your life than I do.
I am looking forward to settling down.
I hear you.
How are you today?
I'm good. I did an ocean paddle this morning, close to 6 miles. It was probably in the 40s when we launched. I put on a jacket and I shouldn't have, because the jacket goes under the spray skirt, under the, your life jacket. And so if you have to take it off, somebody has to secure your kayak so you don't fall in as you're doing all that nonsense. We didn't even get out of the channel and I got hot. I know I should not wear a jacket when I paddle. So I had a great paddle.
Wow.
I feel good. It's all good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I can't imagine getting out. I mean, I know what I'm like getting out of my jacket, like in the car. I can't imagine. You're like telling me about this wiggling out of a jacket in a kayak, and I'm just like in awe.
Yeah.
That's so great.
Yeah. Well, I didn't fall in. That's the good news.
Yeah, you.
It's a good day.
Yeah. So we said that I would start us off today.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so funny how I know I was mentioning, it's funny, you know, when you like start walking and you like deliberately start on the
Mm-hmm.
wrong foot. That's what it feels like right
Right.
now to me. So we were talking a little bit about having our episode, kind of continuing this conversation about being in friendship, being in relationship, and navigating those
Mm-hmm.
waters. Haha, see what I did there? And how do we do that? You know, especially as HSPs, right? We're only 15 to 20% of the population. We're used to growing up with this sense of maybe some significant people in our lives, teachers, classmates, friends, maybe family members, not really getting us. And then how it's already challenging enough, a developmental challenge, I think, making friends and keeping friends into adulthood, let alone my experiences of dating, post divorce and everything. So, how do we go from not just like strangers and into friends and friendships and navigating what the expectations are and how we want to be in friendship? How deep do we want to go? Right? What are the things that connect us? And then how does intimacy develop in friends? So you can kind of think of that with strangers, but then I'm also curious about people that have been with us also because we change so much
Mm-hmm.
throughout, like life circumstances change and yeah, what holds us all together. So just some thoughts about that today.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had something happen recently that we talked about. I think that this is really relatable to everybody. What do you do when you have a relationship and you think that you can bring certain things to the relationship? So in this instance, something was making me feel uncomfortable with the other person and it was affecting me where I didn't want to show up. And so I thought, I need to deal with this. And I shared my feelings and it was about how the other person was showing up. I thought we'd done enough healing. We've done this dance many, many times before, and I'm going to cut to the chase. I will not be bringing my feelings about this person in the relationship and what happens in the relationship to this relationship anymore, period. It's too hurtful to me. And what is it that keeps me from seeing, having really unrealistic expectations and not recognizing what is capable or possible in some relationships? And I'm clear now, like I got the lesson this time. And how do we navigate? Because I was really able to slow the process down this time and see all the things that came up that were not honoring of me. And I'm not saying that it's intentional on this person's part. I'm not saying that they were trying to do anything that was unkind. And it was very uncomfortable and very painful. And what I can also do is jump to, Jen and I have demonstrated on the podcast talking about things that are uncomfortable and that we have that amazing ability to talk about things that are not working in the moment and really feel seen and heard and honored and respected and how incredibly healing it's been. And I have that in a handful of relationships. But when I went through this with this other person, the fears that came up for me is like, am I really hard to be in a relationship with? And I was also told that they don't share certain things with me. And so it's like, am I like reactive? Am I defensive? Am I hard to be around? Do my friends think that there's stuff around about me that they don't tell me because they don't want to hurt my feelings? I mean, it really activated a lot of fears and gremlins for me. I did end up going back and doing some reality checks with the people that I'm friends with. And what I hear consistently is, I love how honest you are. I love your vulnerability. You model to me how to show up in relationships. It's really a gift to be in a relationship with you. And my gremlins kept coming up. So I'm sharing this with you because I think it's pretty typical that this happens. And so I really had to work on, what do I know about myself? What do I know about my current relationships? And as Jen started this episode out saying, we grow, we change. Sometimes our friendships aren't meant to last with us. Sometimes they shift and they change, and that's okay. And how do we assess, is this a friendship where we just do things together? Is this a friendship where we talk about a specific topic? Is this a friendship where we talk about our feelings and how we're doing in other relationships, but we don't talk about what's happening in our relationship? And how do you assess those things?
Such great questions. I mean, as you were talking about that, I know you've talked about it like testing the relationship, right? Seeing what happens when you go there and then getting that feedback, just kind of like living your way into the answer. But I'm also curious if there's room to talk about it just explicitly, right? So instead of it being implicit and like, mess around and find out, you can also talk just, what are your ideas about friendship? I think when you were going through this, you said this thing, I really loved it. It was, what if from the other person's perspective, and I can tell a story how I've had this happen in my life too. They're kind of like, dude, what are you doing? Like, why are you going there? And I've had that happen where here I think I'm deepening intimacy and I'm sharing something that I want this person to know about me or this person to speak to. And, I'm always curious about like what part of that is HSP and then what part of that maybe is attachment wounding, because I think those can be a little bit difficult to tease out. And the other person receives that as like, what are you doing? Like, why are you blowing up like this good thing we have? And it's so, you're laughing.
Well, because every time I bring up my feelings in this relationship, which is not very often, I feel like I'm an annoying gnat. I mean, I really feel like every time I talk about a feeling that I'm having about the relationship, not other things, I just feel like a grimace and eye roll, like, oh, are you doing that thing again? Like, why do you have to do this?
Yeah.
It's painful.
Yeah. Yes, it is painful. And that, I think, something that clues me into the attachment wounding, right? It's when whatever is going on with the other person says something about us, because that's like the early childhood. Let me figure out who I am by looking into this mirror, how this other person sees me, how they receive me. Ideally, that is an unconditionally loving caregiver. We all know how that goes with the array of caregivers we're given in early childhood sometimes. And I don't think that ends in adulthood, obviously. Like, we still are mirrors for each other. But I think hopefully when we're coming from a more adult place, we might be like, oh, look, that mirror is kind of dusty, or that mirror has a little warp in it. Like, and that this person receiving me, there's something there going on that they're responding to that's not mine. And I've been talking a lot with clients lately about having this distinction between this is my experience with my history, with my mood that day. Because, we've talked about how had this happened a week ago, I would have been a mess, or, if it happened today, I would be fine, or just depending on what's going on in our lives. So to really, we think we have to respond, or that like, it's almost like there's this one reality and whose reality gets to win, and even internally, like with IFS, like we're not mono-minded. It's not just one in there. Like, you can even inside yourself have really different perspectives. So now pop out another person here, and they're going to have a multitude of perspectives too. I know you and I have talked about how can we hear each other and hear each other's experiences in a way that we don't have to respond self-defensively, or that then says something about me, or that this can just be
right.
Wow, that's what you're going through, huh? Thank you so much for sharing your experience with me,
Right.
instead of making it about me.
And I think that in order to have that, there has to be a shared language, there has to be a trust, there has to be an emotional connection. There needs to be a value for authenticity and vulnerability, and the ability to look at our own stuff, so that you and I do this beautifully, that when I want you to show up for me and I'm having attachment wounds, I'm able to go like, I know it's not realistic. I don't like that I'm in this place. I can acknowledge that it's hard for me. I can imagine that it might be hard for you. I can do perspective shifting. I can talk about, how are you supposed to know if this is a day where I need you to reflect me or not reflect me? And I wish that I didn't have those days. So we have this ability to not only talk about the communication, but to share from a very intimate and vulnerable place that is really healing and fulfilling. In this other relationship, those elements just aren't there. And what this other person did was trying to understand their own process, was kind of verbally processing, but it felt like it was about all the reasons why what they did was okay for them. And it was hurtful for me to listen to. I didn't have that connection. I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel understood. And it felt like I was witnessing their process, justifying why it was okay for them to not hear what I had to say. And I was thinking about, you went through a difficult time in a relationship and you sent me some information to look at. And I read a little bit of it. And it was really hard for me to continue to, like, it was dysregulating for me because of the nature of the way that the person communicated. So I'm very sensitive to that, which was helpful to see in this relationship, that style of the communication, I didn't feel a part of it. I didn't feel connected. I didn't feel seen. And so it felt like I was just hearing all the reasons why this person was justified in what they were doing. And for me, that was very dysregulating. And I think had I felt that sense of, gosh, I'm sorry, that must have been really hard. Let's talk about this together. And had I felt a part of it, I think I really would, I have a tremendous capacity to hear somebody else's perspective, but not if I feel like I'm not part of it and they're just trying to sort out why it's okay for them to be where they're at. That's a little jaded, but in this moment, I don't know how to communicate it differently.
So what I'm hearing you say, and the lens that I use, is one of power. Right? We've talked about this before, and this is why I'm so passionate about the parenting work that's power with, and the friendships and the model for relating to people that's power with. So I don't know if I'm accurate in this at all, but if you're talking to someone and you're seeped in a power over dynamic, which means, and so it's like wanting to control the narrative, right? It has to be this way. And there's one narrative that we all have to agree on or something, and it's going to be mine. And this is why, because what it is it's invalidating, right? It's like, this is why everything that I did was okay. And so that should therefore make your experience somehow not make sense, essentially. Like, if we can't allow that there are personal power, right? So power is derived from just the fact that you're breathing, and you don't have to wrestle for power with anybody else. You get to keep your thoughts, your feelings, your perspectives. They're yours. You can own them. And guess what? So does the other person, right? And they get to own them. And they can just sort of be this like standalone. And then the sharing comes from that kind of power with place. Like, oh, this is what I see over here, and that's what you saw over there. But I think that invalidation or that cutting down, to me, that feels like a power play.
Yeah.
And so unless you can have those conversations, it becomes, your choice is either to submit, right? And I think a lot of us really have trouble with this, or just maybe holding on to how we want to hold on to our stance, right? We want to have our sovereignty as beings, and just letting the other person think and have what they have. So then instead of doing tug of war, it becomes, thank you so much for sharing that with me. Thank you for sharing your perspective. I would love maybe in a day if you could create some space to hear what that was like for me.
Yeah. I have to say, in this relationship, I wouldn't go back in and do that. I just wouldn't. And I'm really confident that this person believes that they were being mindful and curious and trying to understand how we're different and what comes up for them. I don't think that there was any malintent. I just don't. But I think that sometimes how we're wired, the skill set that we have, what we want in relationships, what we've experienced. I mean, I really feel like you and I have this gift of intimacy and depth and really showing up in a very raw and vulnerable way, but holding that space very sacredly for each other. And this relationship just doesn't have those things. And you and I had talked about this as I was going through it, about me going back in and doing what you're talking about. I'm like, no.
Oh, yeah. Right. And sometimes you can, and sometimes you just can't.
Yeah.
Or like you said, you're just too worn out.
Yeah.
Sometimes, I don't know. I mean, I know you and I have studied this stuff. I think we get excited by this stuff.
Yeah.
I think we get excited by depth. And I know it's funny. I forget if it was you, if we were talking about this, but I was thinking about like where this tendency, I know for me to be, I'm just going to throw it out there. I don't like these words, but like emotionally manipulated, right? And I think back to Gabor Mate's work, like one of the things that even makes that possible is this idea that somehow it's not safe to have the full range of human emotions fully. So we have to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And other people are responsible for how we feel, or we feel responsible about how we make other people feel. And that sort of sets this groundwork for being emotionally manipulatable, and like, I think that that's kind of at the heart of some of these sort of power dynamics that happen. And power is relative in every relationship. So I do think it's worth looking out for. And is power really being shared here? And I like how you pulled the word sacred, because to me, that is a relationship that's like co-creative, it's respectful. There isn't a power over kind of thing happening. I know one of the things that I wanted to say was that, like, you and I get excited. At least I do. I remember there was an early podcast that we did together where it was, when these challenges come up, it's like, oh, goody, batter up.
Right.
Here we go.
Right.
It's time to show up in friendship, and that can challenge and conflict be seen as an invitation for intimacy. Wow, intimacy. This is an area of you that I'm not that familiar with. I don't get it. And so the work of friendship being understanding when we don't.
Right. There's also this sense of safety that even though I get nervous sometimes and it's hard for me, I feel like I can rest in the attachment. I don't have that in this other relationship. And I found myself constantly bracing. What am I going to be met with? Is it going to be understanding, or is it going to be defensiveness? Is it explaining why what they did was justifiable in their sense? And there's not resting there. I know part of that is my wounding. And that doesn't mean that I acted from a place of wounding, but I can tell you that I feel so much differently in the handful of close relationships that I have, showing up and going, something's going on that I'm uncomfortable with. We need to have a hard conversation. And then I'm met with this, like, gosh, I want to be here for you. I didn't know I was doing that. Tell me. Which activates that gremlin. Like, am I just hard to be with? I don't think so. I would want someone to tell me if I'm not attuning. And if you were holding things back in our relationship because I'm not responding in a way that meets your needs, or I'm not doing things, gosh, I would really like to know that. I may or may not be able to meet that need, but I want to be here to attune to you and the people that I care about. And the only way I can do that is if people tell me. So I welcome that. It's not a dangerous thing, but I think the challenge is how do you assess the people that you're in relationship with to know, do they have this desire? Is it a value of theirs? Do they have this skill set? And like I said, I think that this person really believes that they were doing their best to try and understand, but because our orientations are so different, by the time it was over, I felt really exhausted and worn out, and it felt like this is too much work, and I don't want to do this. And so it's easy to do a coulda, woulda, shoulda. Maybe you shouldn't have shared that. I'm okay. This is how we learn. I brought it to the relationship to try and see if we could add something new. And from my perspective, it's just too exhausting. So I'm going to dial it back, and that's okay. So if you have those relationships where you can only go a certain way, can you be okay with that? And can you shift gears and know that you always use this analogy to me, Jen, about like you don't go into a hardware store looking for milk. And so with relationships, are you going into, a relationship where somebody has something to give, but you're looking for something that they don't have to give? And can you be okay with that? And how do we make those adjustments?
Yeah. I mean, I always think that humility has an important part to play, right? Our own, like, okay, there's my limit.
Mm-hmm.
One of my lifelong friends, Jewel, I'm not exactly the friend she's going to go out clubbing with, because I don't do that very often. And I love that she has friends to do that. And I accept, that's not always going to be me ever, hardly. And we know where to meet each other. So that's, I don't know, and just, again, being explicit about that. And I'm not saying I have this all figured out. I mean, I've definitely been very bewildered, very wounded, very in there, just like trying and trying and trying to be understood. I definitely have that one where I struggle when, if it's hard, suddenly I flip into what's wrong with me. I'm difficult to love. I don't don't know, like when I get a little bit of distance, that's when I'm able to go, oh, wait a minute. And to get some of that clarity of, I do love that metaphor, right? I'm wanting milk. This person has hammers and nails here,
Mm-hmm.
and that's okay. There's a lot of cool things you can do with hammers and nails, right? But this isn't, and you can just sort of tell by, if we're able to lay down the self-defensiveness, know our own power, and know that we have a right to, we should dig out that Bill of Rights, right? Mm-hmm. That we have a right to our perspective, and that multiple perspectives exist, and that's okay, that's safe. Like somehow I think that feels threatening to us, that it's safe. You don't have to rescue this person from their emotions. We're here to understand them, not that you can sort of see what's happening. I mean, now it's pretty clear. It's like, wow, like I was going for some depth and understanding, and I wanted to share. I've said in the podcast before, like that's a gift to the relationship, in my opinion, because that's the relationship I want to be in. And to other people, it's not a gift. It's like, what are you doing? This is really scary. Why are you putting that on me? You're saying that, and some of it is wounding, but not all of it. It's not all of it. Some of it's like natural preference, like me just not wanting to go out clubbing a lot, right? But, here I am wanting to share something with you, and it's, why would you share that with me? Kind of why are you doing this to us? And I'm like, wait a minute, what am I doing this to? If we can kind of capture that in a moment and be like, oh, wait, we're wanting really different things. We're having very different experiences here. And that's okay. I like what you're saying about there's no malice here. And I know, like, the last few times I've had this show up in relationships, very, very painful. There is no malice. These are good people, right? These are people we're in relationship with that we love. And that in many ways, there's a lot of harmony. And then it's like, whoops, like here's this thing. And it becomes an impasse. Sometimes it doesn't feel safe, but can we frame that as limitations? Just a lack of preference. Maybe it's a lack of skill. Like, I just don't know how to go there with you. I can't swim in that space. And can we get away from having to malign each other? Because that was another painful element. All of a sudden I'm like, whoa, why am I being maligned here? Like, we just want something different.
Right.
And we're not understanding each other. And that's the sort of the fear, right? That I'm afraid of feeling this way. Something's wrong. This is where the shame of it is, like, it's in our languaging even, right? Like Marshall Rosenberg, who did the nonviolent communication work, says, like, we English, like, we have this language of kings where we want to always identify, who do I praise and knight versus who do I punish and throw in the dungeon. And I think that really, and so that there you go, that's power, right? And those dynamics show up everywhere. And if we can realize that that's what's going on, like, oh, we're arguing about something that we really don't have to argue about. These are just very different experiences, and that can be okay. That's the part that I'm trying to remember and keep in mind these days, really top of mind, because I can do that for years. Like, keep going back into those cycles because I'm so invested in it being okay.
Right. Well, in this relationship, I was told that the person feels like they have to walk on eggshells. That's not about me. That's not about me. And I'm sure every single listener has heard something similar to that. And then what I hear a lot of people ask is, well, then how do I show up authentically if, like in this instance, not going to bring certain things to the relationship out of kindness to myself? Because of how we're wired, it just doesn't work. And so it's not that I'm being inauthentic. Part of how I'm being kind is by not bringing those things. I kind of got this analogy. I don't think it's a great analogy, but it's kind of like if I had a child who wanted to wear roller skates to church, I don't go to church. Like, you don't roller skate in church unless there's a roller skating event. Does it mean that you can't love roller skating? No. Does it mean that you don't go to church? No. But there are just certain things that we need to kind of pull back and see, is this the hardware store? Is this the grocery store? And that's how we care for ourselves. And how do we reframe that so that we don't have this sense of we're not being authentic and genuine? It's just that we want to share our tender hearts with people that love and embrace our tender hearts and see them as being tender hearts. And if somebody sees it as a gory, bloody, yucky thing that's
Mm.
yucky, then why would you bring that? And so it's part of how we learn in our maturity of what is this relationship about? What can the relationship tolerate and handle? And which parts do I want to bring? And it's kind of like, I'm sure all of you have work friends or you belong to a gym or a club or something. And it's not like you go and you talk about all of your intimate things that you have certain ways of showing up for different groups or different people. And it's not that you're being inauthentic, but you just figure out what is going to be a good fit for that situation where you can be met and seen and there's compatibility there.
It's so interesting. I love what you're saying. So, this assumption that basically having boundaries or appropriate expectations is somehow inauthentic. I think right there is a good example of where our language falls short. Like, I'm a word nerd. Like,
Me too.
I was an English major in my undergrad. Like, I love looking at this stuff, and language is a living thing, and it reflects the values and the standards, I guess, of the people that are creating it together, and the language that we've inherited, at least according to Marshall Rosenberg, and I think he's onto something here, is very like black and white. So isn't that reflective of this? Well, then that's not authentic. Well, wait a minute, that's not what we're saying. Like, I don't think our language is sophisticated enough. It's funny. We need to make language work for us, right? Like, we need to be able to really be clear and precise sometimes in what we're saying, particularly if it's something very sensitive in nature. Words matter greatly. And to also know that our words have limitations. So, what you just described, having boundaries, having expectations doesn't mean you're being inauthentic. Having privacy doesn't mean you're, somehow, that was a big one for me. Like, when you grow up not really thinking you're entitled to privacy, you feel somewhat dishonest when you're just giving yourself something that's private.
Mm-hmm.
So it's inherent in our language to be so black and white. And we're going to have to fight for those areas of gray, right? In our languaging of things.
Yeah. And I'm thinking even I think we need to find a new term for black and white because again, it weaponizes black as being negative and white as being positive. It's like how do we get out of those extremes and the binary? I'm just naming it as it comes up because again, we don't have language for this and the language is based in archaic terms where we have a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. Yes. All or nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. I tend to talk about the binary and then the messy middle because, again, our language needs to grow and change with us.
Yeah. It's funny. Language was really alive until we standardized it, right?
Yeah.
And then it became, then we have grammar police and spelling police and everything else. But that wasn't until Shakespeare's time. Webster came and, standardized it. We lost some of the aliveness of it, I think. We still have some of it, but not as great as we could.
I know. Jen, is there anything else before we wrap up today?
Oh, there's so much more to be said, but I guess we'll pause it there for now. I love being with you. Thank you.
Love being with you too, Jen. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye. Hey again. So I'm curious to know, was that helpful? I know that struggling in friendships, relationships, partnerships can really be difficult. And I think we often think it's about the trait of being a highly sensitive person. I think that there's so much more involved. People bring their own wounding. Sometimes our wounding collides in certain relationships. Sometimes it's a good fit. I mean, there are so many factors of this. So if you're struggling, if you want some clarity, if you want to learn how to thrive, please feel free to reach out to either Jen or myself. You can reach Jen at heartfulnessconsulting.com. You can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. Jen and I both rock at this stuff. And we share our struggles with you because it's not like you learn these skills and then you don't ever struggle. Being alive and human means that we deal with humans, which are messy and complicated and joyful and satisfying and fulfilling. I think often I talk about the challenges in life and I just assume that y'all know that there's joy and fulfillment and satisfaction there, but maybe I don't name it enough. And maybe what y'all think is that I'm telling you that life is hard and not joyful. I think it's both. And I think that to the extent that we feel sadness and hard things is also the extent that we feel joy. So if we only tolerate a little bit of negative or uncomfortable feelings, then I don't think that we have as much capacity to feel the joyful, pleasurable feelings. That's just my thought. I don't know. I think that's all I have. I hope you were doing well. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a listener. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's your superpower. Have a blessed day.